Um, I'm going to tell you about Park Van Tassel, and he's got such a long name. I'm just going to call him Van. But this fellow made the first balloon flight in Albuquerque, but it was also his very first balloon flight. And he actually went up 9,000 feet above ground level, right over the city, and he horizontally went 9,000 feet and flew all the way from Newtown to Old Town. Not very big flight, up and back down again. So let me start into my slideshow. I think it might go best if you hold any questions till the end. I timed this out a little earlier, and I think it's about 35 minutes, if that's okay. So here we are. This is Van, and he flew gas and hot air balloons. And when I say hot air, I really mean smoke balloons, and I'll explain that further on in the presentation. He flew in 5 states, 6 territories, and 24 countries, and it all started right here in Albuquerque. He actually had an idea of a transcontinental flight across the USA and also across India. He never did those, but he was inspired to do that. He partnered with an aviation pioneer, Thomas Scott Baldwin, on death-defying parachute jumps from balloons. And he was rumored to have been eaten by sharks off the coast of Oahu, Hawaii. Here's his early days. He was born July 1853 in north central Indiana and first saw balloons at a village fair in Ohio and began building model paper balloons that he saw at the fair. At age 19, he married Elizabeth Spencer. That marriage apparently did not last long, but that was his first marriage of 5. He journeyed to California before he came to New Mexico. And in California, he met up with a balloon manufacturer and pilot, Professor Martin. And he really was the mentor for Van. That's how he learned ballooning. That's where he bought the city of Albuquerque balloon. So before he made any historic flights in Albuquerque, he attempted to fly in California. And in mid-August 1880, he was promoting a flight from Stockton. He hooked up, believe it or not, he didn't know much about gas ballooning, but he hooked up to a city gas lamp and tried to fill his balloon from that. Well, that did not work, and the crowd was quite disappointed, so no ascension there. But this was a problem that he had throughout his career of not having sufficient lifting gas, and I'll talk about that some more. As a professional aeronaut, he could not just make a living just on ballooning, so he also owned in Stockton a tobacco store. And that's where he met his second wife. And that was June 1879. He married Ella Block of Stockton, and they both moved to Albuquerque. And here he owned the Elite Saloon, which was at the northwest corner of 2nd and Railroad, which we now call Central. And he advertised for a balloon ascension on the 4th of July, 1882. And this is the only picture we have of the balloon being inflated on a vacant lot at 2nd and Gold. The balloon is about 30,000 cubic feet, which is fairly small. He bought it for $850 from Professor Martin, and he christened it City of Albuquerque. Well, he inflated the balloon at 2nd and Railroad and Gold, right in that area. There was a gas line that he tapped into from the city gas works, which was 2 or 3 blocks on Railroad to the east, close to the railroad tracks. Despite customers going without any gas for 2 days, the balloon was only 2/3 full. The gas he's using is coal gas. It's got some hydrogen in it, but it's certainly not pure hydrogen. Another name for it is illuminating gas. It's what the city customers used for illumination, that's gas lamps, and cook stoves. The picture in the building in the back of that picture in the background was the Cromwell building. And you see it here in this picture many years later. It was under construction at that launch site. And I think that the photographer was Ben Wittick, and he was the A&P Railroad's official photographer. The reason I say that is that he had a photo studio on second, not very far from the launch site. And in fact, did take that photo that you see below, which is really a Xerox of a postcard. That's not very good, but he did have credit on that picture. I don't know if you've seen this kind of drawing of downtown Albuquerque before, but it kind of puts everything in perspective here. Can you see my cursor moving around?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. This is the Cromwell building right here, and it's on 2nd Street. And this building here was a vacant lot at the time. That's the launch site. And the photographers, if there was more than one, would have been over here looking east. I got a north arrow down here. So, and here's Gold, and this is 2nd, and that's Railroad. And the Elite Saloon is right here on the corner of Railroad and 2nd. And here is Dr. William Lyon's office. And what's interesting about him, he was an eyewitness to this balloon ascent. Here's a picture of him right here. His office was upstairs in that building, and he could look to the south out of his building from his office window, and he had a great view of the inflation. I wish he had a camera at the time. He would write daily letters to his fiancée, Corey, down in Las Cruces. And he was at this time writing about the firecrackers and the brass band and all the revelry by the saloons that were all around Railroad Avenue and the balloon launch. He referred to Van as a whiskey slinger because his Van's saloon was right across the street from the doctor's office. Well, he was peering out his window, and he waited all day. He waited and waited, and he wrote to Corey, I waited all day for that confounded thing. But he did actually see the ascension and the balloon flight from his window, and he said it was something grand, majestic, awe-inspiring. Had planned to take a passenger. Now here's a case that the balloon was only 2/3 full, not enough to lift 2 people. So he asked the passenger to climb out, and then he dumped a whole full bag of sand. Sand is the ballast, and if you drop enough, the balloon will start to lift off. You usually do it slowly, but he just threw a whole bag over and hit a spectator who later sued. But the balloon soared. It went way up there. The altimeter read 14,200 feet. And he was starting to have some trouble breathing. And you do. There's very little oxygen at that altitude. So he panicked and he pulled the valve open. This is the gas valve. It opens the gas valve on the top of the balloon. Once you start releasing gas, it'll start to descend. And he did. He came down rather quickly, landed in a cornfield near Old Town. That picture down here below is people running to the balloon landing, but we don't see the balloon in the picture. It's already landed. So unfortunately, we don't have any pictures of the balloon in flight. So if any of you come across an 1882 era balloon flying over Albuquerque, we sure like to see that balloon picture. Okay. A month later, Van took his balloon up to Las Vegas. At the time, it was the 2nd largest city in Albuquerque, and quite a rough and tumble town at that. Well, he partially inflated his balloon, but while he was doing it, it slipped its moorings and ripped open. So he made repairs and he tried again, and it also failed. He figured out that he was too heavy. Van weighed about 220 pounds. So he recruited a lightweight, and I think it was uh, Ella, she was with him, and she probably suggested find somebody lighter to fly the balloon.
Yeah.
Well, he did, and the balloon soared, went up very quickly, and Van blamed the erratic flight on an inexperienced replacement. Well, of course, the guy has never flown a balloon before. But nevertheless, the people in Las Vegas did pay for their entrance fee, and he managed to collect $500 from the citizens of Las Vegas. And that was in August 1882.
Good money.
Yeah. Well, the city fathers were so excited about his July 4th ascension that he was booked for the second annual territorial fair. And that was in September. And as you know, all our state fairs are in September. Well, the balloon this time was being inflated at the gasworks. And then they tried to walk the balloon from the gasworks to the fairgrounds. Well, they lost control. The balloon left without Van on board. And when it goes up so high, the gas expands and the balloon bursts at high altitude. So that was not a good deal. The territorial fair did not get to see a balloon ascension. The newspapers called Van a fraud. And you can see in Las Cruces Sun Times or Sun News, Park Van Tassel, the Albuquerque Aeronaut, has disappeared, owing over $1,000, gone up in a balloon. Well, Van's business, the Elite Saloon, didn't go very well after that either. So by February 1883, he closed his balloon and left town, still owing money. And he went west, probably by train. And when he reached Peach Springs, Arizona, he wrote to the Albuquerque Journal that he had paid all his large bills. I think he still had small bills yet to pay. Well, he headed for the San Francisco Bay Area, and that became his base of operation pretty much for the rest of his ballooning life. He did make a successful flight out of Salt Lake City in July 1883 and went up to 11,000 feet and landed safely in the Wasatch Mountains. This is what gave him an idea. Maybe I could fly all the way across the country. Well, he made more flights in Oregon and a flight from Portland, which has been in the news a lot. From Portland, he flew over a forest fire, also in the news a lot these days. But by February 1884, he was pretty well operating out of San Francisco. One of the places he flew from is Ocean Beach, which is right on the coast of San Francisco on the Pacific side. If you've ever been there, there's a cliff house and you look down on Seal Rocks. Oh, by the way, he did make another flight in Ella's hometown, Stockton, California, and he attempted one in Denver, but that didn't work out too well. But in November, he completed construction of the Eclipse, and this was an 85,000 cubic foot balloon, which was 3 times the size of the Albuquerque balloon. And this balloon, he did fly several times from Ocean Beach and also Central Park in San Francisco. So he really started thinking about a transcontinental flight. In fact, the large Eclipse balloon was built for that purpose. Well, one time in November 1884, Van and 2 passengers took off from Central Park. The gas was fed to the balloon from a canvas tube from the city gas main. At 8,500 feet, Eclipse drifted out over the Pacific. This happened to Van several times. He did fortunately find an onshore breeze that carried him back to the Marin Peninsula, and he landed in the bay at sundown and was tugboat towed to shore. The balloon got pretty soggy. And look what the Daily Alta California described. He said, an immense crowd that desired to see the bag soar aloft and explode and murder some of its passengers. People were really looking for spectacular balloon flights in those days. This is where he landed. This is San Francisco. There's Alcatraz, Angel Island, and he landed over here in Raccoon Strait on the other side. Okay, next stop, World's Fair in New Orleans. By the way, Ella got fed up with Van's foolhardy balloon escapades and was granted a divorce at Stockton in March 1885. 2 weeks after that, Van headed for the World's Fair with his Eclipse balloon, and he did launch. It was a solo flight, and he sped across the Mississippi River and made a drag landing in a swamp, and he fell out, and the unruly monster tumbled across the Mississippi, and the balloon was attacked by plantation workers who tore the envelope open. Another rough time. Only a few weeks after his divorce from Ella, he just wanted to be a married guy. He married Clara Kuykendall of San Jose, April 1885, and challenged Professor Whiteside, another balloonist, in Eclipse in a race in San Francisco. And they both had rough landings. Whiteside jumped and broke his leg, and Van splashed down and dragged through the mud flats at San Francisco Bay. So that was another adventure. This is when he teamed up with Thomas Scott Baldwin. Baldwin became a famous aviation pioneer, and he invented the parachute, at least in this country. And he wanted to jump from Van's balloon, the Eclipse, and he did on January 30th, 1887. He dropped down from 600 feet over an alarmed crowd in San Francisco, and it was a success. So the two got together and continued to improve the art of making mile-high daredevil parachutes from balloons. Eventually, the two aeronauts went their separate ways, each forming a P.T. Barnum-type circus troupe. This is how parachutes and balloons get together. This is a sketch of a hydrogen gas balloon being inflated, and you see it's a netted balloon. You got people standing around holding it down, and these are gas bags holding it to the ground. And there's the fill tube right there. And it's probably, again, coal gas from a city main. Well, the balloon parachute is attached around the equator about midway up the balloon, right here. And the aeronaut sits on a trapeze, and in one hand, he's got the lines to the balloon. In the other hand, he's got the parachute cords. Next event is for the balloon to be released, and he lets it go, but he's still hanging on to the parachute lines, and the force of his fall away from the balloon snaps the parachute loose from the balloon, and he's on his way parachuting down. Well, Baldwin kind of developed a way to pack a balloon in a very small package, like a backpack, which you see today, these days. In fact, he improved this umbrella-type parachute even more by putting a circular hole at the top to add stability. Well, Clara became a balloon parachute jumper, and on the 4th of July, 5 years since his ascension in Albuquerque, Clara was going to make a jump over the city of Los Angeles. And that made quite a stir as rumors spread that a woman was planning to commit suicide on a national holiday. Well, despite the thrilling 5-minute drop and a safe landing, some people actually complained that she did not kill herself. Well, now Van and Clara took their show on the road. This was throughout 1888, and they made jumps all over California and up in the Pacific Northwest. One time in San Jose, Clara's hometown, they were forced to cancel an event because they had inferior lifting gas. So Van pulled the ripcord that emptied the gas balloon partially filled. The crowd got really angry and pelted him with rocks. And their manager, Frank Frost, waved his pistol in the air and tried to get control of the crowd. So some real wild times they had. And speaking of wild times, Van had the scare of his life. In February 1889, again a case of insufficient lifting gas at Ocean Beach. He was inflating the Eclipse balloon, and despite a premature liftoff, he jumped from 1,500 feet. It's really not as high as he wanted to be. Well, his legs got tangled up in the parachute rigging as 10,000 spectators, and you can see a huge crowd here on the beach, watched in horror. Van actually made a landing without any injuries, but that was his last. He had up to this point made 24 parachute jumps, but vowed that this would be his last one. He did make a few jumps. It wasn't actually him. He solicited somebody from the crowd to make a parachute jump on the beach of Salt Lake City, Great Salt Lake, next to Salt Lake City. Did that a couple times up in Utah. Then he came back to Albuquerque, and this time he was going to do a balloon parachute jump for the 4th of July celebration. Well, he returned to the city about June 29th, and here he engaged the services of Joe Lawrence. Now, Joe was an inexperienced balloonist. He had never done a parachute jump or even seen a balloon before, but in an interview with the Albuquerque Morning Democrat reporter, Van said that they're going to make a 4th of July ascension and that Joe would be the jumper. He would jump out. Van would stay on the ground and handle the ground operations. So this was going to be a mile-high jump from the Eclipse balloon over Albuquerque, but it did not happen. And we don't exactly know why. Certainly, people came from Socorro, they came from Santa Fe. They felt like they were deceived by the citizens of Albuquerque because there was no balloon parachute jump. We think that maybe Van had his mind on something much bigger, and that was an upcoming world tour that he was about to make. That's the only explanation we can think of why this did not happen. Unfortunately, local papers did not give him good press on this. I believe that was his last time in Albuquerque. However, Joe Lawrence of Albuquerque, he recruited, and Joe worked in hardware stores in the Midwest, Las Vegas, and Albuquerque. No prior ballooning experience, but he joined the troop. And when you join the Van Tassel troop, you take on the name Joe Van Tassel. So now we have the Van Tassel brothers, and they left Albuquerque behind. And Joe made some risky parachute jumps, but successful, in the San Joaquin Valley, all the way from around Stockton, all the way down to Bakersfield. And so he made a number of drops, but this time it's not a gas balloon, it's a smoke balloon. This is a smoke balloon being inflated, and it's held up by poles and held down by people holding ropes. And it's inflated with smoke from a fire under the balloon. And the sooty smoke and the hot air is supposed to inflate the balloon. This was done a lot for what we call smoke balloon jumps. Well, the tour got underway. Joe and Van and the manager, Frank Frost, boarded a steamship at San Francisco bound for Hawaii and the start of their world tour. Clara stayed behind in San Jose, and within about 10 days, they had already done a successful balloon ascension from the Kapolani Park there in Honolulu, and that was Joe's fourth ascension and jump. Unfortunately, Hawaii then had its very first air disaster. An ascent from the punch bowl on November 16th. It was King Kalakaula's birthday. Joe was confident that he would be staying over land and wouldn't land on water, so he did not carry a life jacket. They lifted off, Joe did, in the balloon by himself. The wind carried him 2 miles out to sea. Before drifting any further from land, he decided to jump. Van organized a search party, and they searched for Joe Lawrence of Albuquerque. He was never found, presumably eaten by sharks. Van offered a $50 award for recovery of his body. Well, newspapers all over, including from the Mesilla Valley Democrat and the Tombstone Epitaph, all reported that the loss of Van Tassel, the famous Park Van Tassel, was lost and eaten by sharks. Well, in time, Clara set the record straight. The casualty was not her husband, but in reality, it was Joe Lawrence of Albuquerque. Well, she added also that Joe had not made a jump since his cliff house scare, which I talked about. Okay, from Hawaii, they went to Australia. And by the way, James Price took Joe's place on the Van Tassel troupe for the world tour. They booked steerage on the HMS Mariposa and headed for Sydney. And news of the Hawaii tragedy already had preceded them before they got there. Frost began making advertising balloon parachute jump about mid-December in 1890. Well, one of the first attempts at a smoke balloon jump ended in tragedy. Van's balloon here is filling with smoke, held down by ropes, held up by poles. One of the poles snapped and killed a young boy at the launch site. Now comes the Van Tassel sisters. They joined the troupe in Newcastle, Australia. They were bright, vivacious young ladies. I have a picture here of Gladys, but could not find a picture of Valerie. They were dressed in rather skin-tight uniforms, kind of like gymnastic costumes, which that alone caused quite a stir, quite a ruckus. They alternated making jumps, performing acrobatics on a trapeze bar thousands of feet above Australia. Well, it wasn't just in Australia where they flew balloons and made parachute jumps. Van actually landed in a tree in Bangkok. In India, he was threatened by fanatics who thought that he would stir up devils in the upper atmosphere. He was reportedly killed in a fall in Sumatra, another one in Calcutta. And Valerie narrowly escaped injury when her balloon burst at only 300 feet, and that was during a show for India's Maharaja. Oh, my phone. Sorry. By the way, Val and Gladys in India both married Hindu men and left the troupe. And by the way, Clara Van Tassel, abandoned in San Jose, secured a divorce on the basis of desertion. There goes wife number 3. And then there's a tragedy in India. And Mo, I know you know about Jeanette Rumari. She was British, very young, assumed the stage name of Jenny Van Tassel. And on May 16th, 1892, she suffered a fatal accident in Dhaka, now the capital of Bangladesh. Her balloon got tangled up in a tree, and they tried to rescue her with bamboo poles, but Van watched her fall to the ground, and she was injured so badly she died the following day. There's two pictures here. They're studio pictures from Calcutta that show Jenny and Van Tassel himself. And these are courtesy of Jenny's niece, Irene Romery. Uh, we tried to get copies of these from the Calcutta studio. That no longer exists. These are just Xerox copies of some prints that Jenny had. We tried to get them from Jenny. It took us a long time to locate her in a rest area for, or a old, what I'm trying to say, a senior citizen's home. She was 95. She died last Christmas before we could make contact with her to borrow these two prints and get permission to use them. And we tried to get permission from the family too, but that was not successful either. So that's the story of those two pictures. They're all over the internet, but we can't get permission to publish them. Van made a lot of ascensions for royalty. I'll go quickly here because this is getting a little long, but he did perform ascensions for the Shah of Persia, the Sultan of Turkey, the Tsar of Russia. And he married in India Edith Ann Nolan in 1892. Van spent a lot of time in India. This was his fourth marriage. Well, finally, he returned to the Bay Area, arriving from Calcutta in 1901. And what he wanted to do is, oh, by the way, Edith didn't go with him, and she eventually remarried. Van took up residence in Oakland, and that's right there on the bay. And he wanted to resume a life of balloon and parachute exhibitions, which he did. For the next decade, he made many successful balloon flights. He had some setbacks, and even working with Professor Martin on building balloons and training for balloon flights, Martin's balloon factory was damaged heavily during the 1906 earthquake. Well, despite advancing years, Van made a lot of captive balloon flights. These are tethered balloon flights, tethered on a rope in Oakland for paying passengers and for people that wanted to be married, airborne in a balloon. He also made some of the very first flights for aerial photography over the Bay Area. And he promoted ballooning as a competitive sport. This is long before the Gordon Bennett races. One summer, 1909, he flew the City of Oakland balloon with a Captain Mars to a 50-mile-an-hour landing in Livermore, which is inland in the San Joaquin Valley. They were injured slightly, but the wicker basket and the load ring were totally demolished, being dragged 2,000 feet through barbed wire fences. Livermore area is all farmland and fenced off. Here's a little graphic of the balloon tipping over and getting snagged in the barbed wire fences. Well, he made many, many flights, and most of them were successful. I tend to harp on his mishaps because they're kind of almost humorous, but in 1909, he organized a flight from San Francisco to San Jose. That balloon race was a combination of pilots from aero clubs of Oakland, San Francisco, and Seattle. So he's starting to develop some balloon competition in the Bay Area. They often launched right from Market Street and Van Ness in downtown San Francisco. That picture there is downtown Oakland. In a race from Alameda, the balloons went out over the Pacific. They do sometimes. And often they would have life preservers attached to the edge of the basket. Usually they stayed out there till late afternoon when the balloon gas cooled and it descended, and they would catch an onshore breeze and drift eastward, hopefully avoiding a dunking in salt water. Um, as an aside, Van married for the fifth time a lady named A.F. Barr in Oakland in 1912, the day after New Mexico's statehood. Um, the 1920 census lists Van as a widower, so we don't know what happened to his fifth wife, but she apparently died uh, while they were married. Well, I'm almost done. This is, I don't know what number slide, but I only got a couple to go. Um, both Baldwin and Van Tassel were great aeronauts and also showmen. And at first, gas balloon ascensions satisfied Americans' public for spectacles. Then balloons came to be kind of commonplace. So Van Tassel and Baldwin both merged their talents and created balloon parachute jumps. And Van saw the parachute as the aeronaut's lifeboat in case he needed to abandon ship, which he often had to do landing in water. Baldwin saw the balloon as a means of raising his mid-air acrobatics all the way to a new level. Both hungered for death-defying leaps. Well, as time went on, Van made fewer and fewer ascensions. In the 1920s, he created a toy balloon company. And you remember, Van started by making toy balloons, little models in the Midwest. So he came full circle in educating young people about aeronautics and flying balloons. By September 1930, he was 78 years old, down on his luck and in failing health. He died October 25, 1930. He's buried in Oakland. He was writing a letter in his sister's home when he died of a sudden heart attack. So this was a man that had boyhood dreams, those paper balloons he made back in Ohio. He lived those dreams. He made real life balloons, and he never let go of those dreams. So here's a guy that started in Albuquerque and really had quite a ballooning career. I kind of wonder what he was writing about in that letter. Now there's a balloon book coming. It's the working title is Skyrider. It's going to be published by UNM Press. The primary author is Gary Fogel. He's an aviation historian, but he's had a lot of help from Rick Van Tassel and myself, who have done a lot of research on Park Van Tassel. Launch date for this book is fall 2021, in time for the 50th anniversary of the Balloon Fiesta. So this is going to be the first authoritative biography of an aeronaut with exceptional courage, pioneering spirit, and an uncanny ability to survive. What he did is introduce parachutes to ballooning and women to aviation. He traveled the American West, Australia, Southeast Asia, India, Africa, many other places, taking ballooning from Albuquerque to the rest of the world. And now the world travels to Albuquerque for its annual Balloon Fiesta. This is Gary. He has already authored an award-winning book on the first glider flight. Now this book's about the first balloon flight in Albuquerque. First glider flight was not here, but it was in 1884. And he has also been involved in model airplanes and holds, look at all the records, 12 world records and 50 national records. He is an adjunct faculty member in the Aerospace Engineering Department at San Diego State University. He lives in San Diego. Helping him is Rick Van Tassel, who is a distant relative of Park Van Tassel, and he has done a lot of research on the family history, and that was a big help. This is a picture of Rick Van Tassel. This picture was taken at the Balloon Museum, but it was on the front page of the Sunday paper in July 2016 of the Albuquerque Journal. And this is me. I'm not in a balloon. I'm on top of the submarine USS New Mexico. These are periscope looking masts back here. There's the Atlantic Ocean, and I'm on the top of the sail of the submarine, about 100 miles off the coast of Florida. As Richard mentioned, I can't keep my feet on the ground. I'm either ballooning or I'm in submarines. So that is the end. I can